For tonight's question time, we've come to the East Midlands city of Derby. Known as one of the birthplaces of the Industrial Revolution, Derby is the original home of Rolls-Royce, as well as one of the country's oldest professional football teams, Derby County. They play just along the road from here at Pride Park. Our audience members have spent the last few hours working on their thoughts and questions for our panel, and as usual, they reflect the electoral picture across the country. And they want to talk about tonight's hugely important meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, plus matters closer to home. Welcome to Question Time in Derby. From the government is Luke Pollard, Armed Forces Minister in the Ministry of Defence. He's been Labour MP for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport since 2017. From the Conservatives, Alicia Kearns is Shadow Minister for National Security and Safeguarding. Until the last general election, she'd been chair of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee and is also MP for Rutland and Stamford. Dr Maya Goodfellow has written for the New York Times, the New Statesman and The Guardian and has authored a book charting the history of UK immigration policy. She's a Presidential Fellow in International Politics at City and St George's University in London. John Caudwell is a billionaire entrepreneur and philanthropist who founded the mobile phone giants Phones for You. Previously a Conservative donor, he declared his support for Labour at the last election. And Freddy Gray is the US editor of the Spectator magazine and hosts the podcast Americano. Last week he wrote that on Ukraine, we have in our eagerness to champion President Zelensky overlooked the more sordid aspects of his leadership. And he said you have to admit Trump is right, or at least not wrong. Good evening, welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Derby, great to see you, and of course, welcome to you at home. Without further ado, let's get the programme underway with our first question from Helen Bates.
Is increasing the defence budget to 2.5% while cutting overseas aid enough to ensure our security?
Well, of course, this is something that Keir Starmer has committed to this week, 2.5% by 2027, 3% for the next Parliament. And I should say that while we're on air, there is a press conference going on between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, and we shall see what comes out of that. We're also recording this a little bit before it goes out on BBC One. Luke.
We live in really difficult times at the moment. So as a defence minister, I see the briefings, the threat assessments about how challenging it is to provide the security. The first duty of this government, and I'm glad the Prime Minister is taking it so seriously, is to keep our country safe. That's why increasing the defence investment from 66 billion, so about 2.3% of our GDP at the moment, to 2.5% or 79 billion by April 2027 is such an important part of renewing our armed forces to meet the threats that we're facing. Now, this is not just about supporting our friends in Ukraine against the Russian threat, because we know that if Russia wins in Ukraine, they're not going to stop with Ukraine. We know they're threatening our allies on NATO's eastern flank. We know that they have spy ships loitering over our infrastructure. And over Christmas, as the Armed Forces Minister, I had to make the difficult decision of mobilising some of our Royal Navy sailors that were hoping to spend Christmas Day with their families to shadow a Russian warship sailing through our waters. Now, we took that decision because that keeps our country safe.
But the question Helen's asking is 2.5% enough? I mean, you've got Mark Rutte of NATO saying it's got to be at least 3%. You've got Donald Trump saying at some point it's got to be 5%.
2.5% helps us deliver the changes we need in our military to deal with the underfunding and hollowing out that we've seen over the last 14 years. We know there's real challenges with our armed forces. We have some brilliant people. The men and women in uniform are outstanding in our armed forces.
And you think 2.5% is enough? And we had General Sir Nick Carter on last week. He was saying that we are massively vulnerable to Russia in terms of armed forces. And echoing that point, we have been hollowed out. Do you think 2.5% is enough to fill us up again, to make up for that hollowing out?
Now, I watched the programme and I agreed with much of what he said.
But that's the question. Is 2.5% enough to make up for that?
2.5% is a substantial investment in our defence industries and in our defence people. Now, there's some real challenges that we have to get on top with that extra money in the defence budget. For at the moment, for example, we inherited a situation that for every 100 people who join our armed forces, 130 leave. We know that of the 49 major defence equipment programmes that we inherited from the last government, only 2 of 49 programmes are on time and on budget. There are real challenges, but we need to learn the lessons of what we're seeing in Ukraine, because we need to update our armed forces. The tactics, the doctrine, the way that war is now fought in Ukraine both takes us back to trench warfare of the past, but also the wars of the future with drone warfare, long-range strikes, a real implementation of new technologies. That's why the increased defence spending and the difficult decision that it was taken to reduce the international aid spending, to move that 0.2% of our GDP to defence and then to increase it further to 3% in the next Parliament. That's a hard decision for a Labour government.
What percentage do you think we need?
Aid.
What percentage do you think we need? On defence,
so,
what would you like?
As the Armed Forces Minister, we spend about 66 billion at the moment, and in April 2027, we'll be spending 79 billion. Now, for me, that means we can provide additional equipment for our forces, we can make sure they're paid well, we can make sure that we've got the renewal of the platforms and the equipment they need to deter aggression. Because in the first instance, our armed forces are there to deter a war, and then we need to have them to have the ability to defeat an aggressor if necessary.
Does that answer your question,
2.5% is a really important investment, but we want to increase it further to 3% in the next Parliament.
And do you think that's what, I mean, to Freddie's point, is that, do you think 3% is enough? That's where we should...
That's where we should be.
That's where we should be?
Given we live in such difficult times.
We absolutely do live in difficult times. And that's why this difficult decision's been taken.
I know you've made that point. Freddie's asking you, what percentage do you think it should be of GDP as Armed Forces Minister?
Well, certainly, when I visit troops, as I've been doing since taking office in July, I know that there's huge enthusiasm, but our troops are using out-of-date equipment far too frequently.
OK, you're not answering the question.
And so...
Is it because you're just not going to answer
No, this investment will make a really big difference. Now,
OK, that's still not answering the question. I'm going to see you, I'm going to give you one more chance. Look at your face. You don't want to answer this question. You're not going to do it, are you? What percentage of GDP should we be spending?
Well, certainly, 2.5% by April 2027
OK,
is a real boost for our...
All right, Freddie, let's hear from you.
...is a real boost for our armed forces.
I think we all know that this upping of the defence budget was a desperate attempt to please the Donald ahead of Keir Starmer going out to Washington.
And I have to say, Donald Trump has responded to it very well in the press conference.
He has responded enthusiastically because he's always nice. He was even nice to Theresa May, who he didn't really get on with at all, but he said very nice things about her.
But it was a manifesto commitment, though. In the elections, 2.5% is a manifesto commitment we brought forward and delivered.
Yeah, you sped it up a little bit. But it's not very much. And while Donald Trump may say nice things, I heard someone put it the other day, the Donald doesn't do decimals. He's not going to change his mind about Britain's defence capacities. The Washington defence establishment knows very well that Britain is not in a position to police Eastern Europe, as Keir Starmer seems to be suggesting that they could with a US backstop. Britain talks a very, very good game on defence, but hasn't really been living up to it.
Alicia?
So I've been very clear over the last few years and outspoken that we had to increase our defence spending. For me, the percentage is actually not what's key. It's about the capabilities and effect we can achieve. And so actually I'm more interested to see what the next SDSR is going to say in terms of how we're going to go forward.
The Strategic Defence Review.
I'm so sorry. There's nothing worse than people talking acronyms. Yes, a Strategic Defence Review.
Which is due in the spring, so presumably any week now.
So the question for me, though, is this 2.7%, 2.5% actually going, sorry, 2.5% by 2027 actually going to be met? Because the one thing the government won't tell us is this so-called increase to 2.5% going to include the agreement they've made to give tens of billions to the Mauritian government? They've also done something the Treasury asked us for years to do, and Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, refused, which was to put the intelligence fund into the defence fund, because then it automatically inflates it and makes it look like we're spending more money on defence. But there's also still this question around aid, because we're saying it's going to, the Prime Minister is saying a 13.4 billion increase, but if you look at ODA, you end up with a shortfall. Overseas aid, you end up with an 8 billion shortfall. So actually, is this commitment real? Because as per Freddie's point, you've sat around since July. We had put into place a plan in April for how we were going to get to it. And we heard Keir and Rachel Reeves refuse to commit to it for months and months and months and did around it. And now we suddenly have it. So I'm not interested in the percentage so much in terms of long term. I've often said 3%. My name is out there many times saying as a minimum. But actually, for me, it's about effect and capability to protect our interests when we're abroad and at home.
OK, so, Alicia, you're saying that the government has not said whether the money,
the Chagos
Islands, is going to come from this. Luke, is it?
Well, the detail of that treaty hasn't been finalised yet, and so I can't give a figure because it's still being discussed.
But is it likely to come from this extra spending for defence?
Well, I mean, that's still to be worked out. And so
it might.
What I'm saying at the moment is the negotiations around the Chagos Treaty, which secures the absolutely vital UK-US base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. There's still discussions taking place with the Russian government, still discussions taking place with the US government.
But so it might come out of this extra money for defence.
The extra money the extra money that we've allocated here are for our armed forces, are for the kit and equipment and the people who serve in our armed forces.
So it won't go to the
we've been absolutely clear. This is an increase here, but we will be setting out the full financial details once the agreement's been signed, once that's come before the House of Commons, because there will be a Commons vote on the agreement.
So just so I'm clear, because I'm a bit confused now. Is money from this extra spending for defence going to go to the Chagos Islands or not?
So the details haven't been worked out because the treaty is still being negotiated at the moment.
Forgive me on that.
Still being negotiated.
Forgive me, I was a civil servant in the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office for my sins before I became a politician. When you go into negotiations, you pre-identify which fiscal pot, which financial pot the money is coming from. You don't just say, well, we're going to negotiate and then we'll work out where we're going to take the money from.
Right.
You say it's from this. So it's either coming from the defence budget or it's not. And the fact you won't rule it out suggests that that's actually where the money for the defence budget is going to be spent.
The audience has not got a word in, and let's hear from them. Yes, the man in the front in the blue shirt.
I think you've got a great demonstration there of what frustrates the public about politicians. You've got loads of smoke and mirrors and reluctance to actually give a straight answer to questions.
There's a man towards the back. You've got a very colourful shirt on with... Is that penguins on it? I can't quite see. Oh, there we go.
Fabulous. My son has the same.
Yeah, it's penguins. So I believe that 2.5% isn't enough. I'm also disappointed that it's by April 2027. That's 2 years away. We have a threat now, and it's not just a threat to borders. We have cyber threats. So I think we should be doing more, and we should be doing it earlier.
OK. And let's hear from the woman here in the red and pink sweater. Yes.
You said that a lot of the new budget is going to go towards the armed forces because we've had so many people leave and we're not recruiting. How are you suddenly going to recruit all these people to the armed forces to make it an attractive proposition?
I will come back to you, but let me bring in the rest of the panel. Maya.
Yeah.
So let me remind you a question. Is increasing the defence budget to 2.5% while cutting overseas aid enough to ensure our security?
I think we need to take a step back with this whole discussion and recognise that the way that the government has responded is incredibly panicked. Essentially, Donald Trump says, jump, Keir Starmer says, how high? And the reason that I say that is taking from the aid budget when there hasn't been a full impact assessment conducted by government, and what that means is taking from some programmes potentially...
That's not true, sorry, because Donald Trump said jump 5% and Keir Starmer jumped 2.5%.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that this kind of panicked response where there hasn't been a full impact assessment conducted, what I'm talking about is taking from the aid budget for the defence budget. I think
do you think it shouldn't have been increased at all, or that the money should have come from somewhere else?
So, firstly, I think it's a morally reprehensible decision to go ahead with taking from the aid budget for defence. Secondly, I think we need to be talking, going forward, I think we need to be talking about what the money is going to be spent on and if it's actually needed. If you look at the UK defence budget, what you see is about 38 billion is spent on military equipment. Ukraine gets around 3 billion a year. That is tiny in comparison. And when we're talking about military equipment, one of the things that we're talking about is sustaining also bases, UK bases around the world that is essentially supporting a US global show of power. So it means the UK being involved in the Saudi-led attack on Yemen, and it means this being about projecting power on the global stage. If we actually want to talk about defence and security, you can look at me with a puzzled expression all you want, but if we want to talk about that, I think we should be pooling resources in Europe, looking at what is going on within Europe and having a broader definition of what we mean by security. Because security for people in Britain is, yes, thinking about defence, absolutely, but it is also making sure that we have food security and energy security, so when Russia does something like invade Ukraine, we are not then also having to pay huge energy bills and worrying about our food supply. That is what security should be about as well.
But threats don't come from only Europe. I'm really sorry, that's an incredibly naive thing to say that we should just focus on Europe. Forgive me, Iran, Russia, China, these are the countries that are putting us at threat at the moment.
Being part of this global race with the US doesn't keep Britain safe.
We don't have a choice.
Absolutely just doesn't.
We can't just say we're in Europe and then we're going to pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist.
It's not about
I've had threats against myself and those other countries. Our country does.
It's about
the idea that we can just focus on Europe is completely naive. That's not the world we live in.
When you have someone so erratic in the White House, it is recognising where to focus more of your energy as opposed to trying to cozy up totally to the President of the United States. Yes, diplomacy, but you need to have red lines. And this government so far hasn't shown itself to be able to stand up to anyone on the global stage.
John?
I think, first of all, you can't put a number on it. 2.5% is nothing.
Well, you think it should be higher?
Yes, but it's not as simple as that, is it? Because if Trump carries on the way that he's going and withdraws from NATO and withdraws as a backstop and withdraws from the very, very powerful position that they've played in world peace in the past, then Europe is extremely vulnerable. And if Putin is allowed to win this, we are all in real trouble. So the situation that we see at the moment geopolitically with Trump and Putin is really terrifying. And I have a personal viewpoint, and you might think this is very far-fetched, but I think there's a potential tripartite agreement between Trump, between Putin and between Xi Jinping that they decide to carve the world up for themselves. Now, I know it's far-fetched.
Like a kind of latter-day Yalta conference
yeah.
with Stalin and Churchill
yeah,
and
absolutely.
Roosevelt.
Because, look, he's already said that he may not defend the invasion of Taiwan. He's sidled up to Putin. He's creating almost a Moscow in Washington with oligarchs and himself ruling the country. He's dismantling everything that is checks and balances. He's sacked 18, or Musk has, 18 inspectors general whose job it is to maintain the US authorities in check. It's a very, very worrying situation. So when we talk about is 2.5% enough, no, it isn't, but the money has to come from somewhere. But Europe has to really now join together as a hugely coordinated group of countries and really defend the situation for Ukraine against Putin, regardless of what Trump says.
Man in the pinkish mauvish shirt, yeah.
Yes. Back when Trump first prompted us to increase defence spending, he said that NATO members weren't paying their fair share and should contribute 2.5%. That was 2016, 17. The world's very different now. There's a lot more threats, and we've seen it happening through the war in Ukraine and the threat that Russia presents through Vladimir Putin. We've increased from 2.3 to 2.5, or we've committed to do it, but that's still only a 10% increase. So if we've got 60 ships in the Royal Navy, now we're going to have 66. It's not a huge increase. I don't think it's going to save our skins. It might stop the terminal decline of our armed forces, but we should be looking at the opportunities of this. Can we invest more in our defence industry, generate jobs and exportable products as well?
Okay. And the man, you've got a jacket. Is it a denim jacket? Oh, I can't quite see a leather jacket.
Leather. Basically, I think people are missing the trick, and I think Trump's winning his argument in a way, because basically we're all part of NATO. And the thing is like, it should be on a financial capita basis, that everybody should be putting in the same amount into the NATO pot. But trouble is, at the minute, all the MPs are talking about individuality, when basically we shouldn't be talking individuality, we should be talking financial, everybody putting the same amount of money into NATO to defend NATO and its territories.
All right. And I'm just letting me take one more point from the woman there in the flowery top.
Do we not need to consider raising taxes to get to, say, 3% on defence spending before the next general election, if the threat is so great?
You would welcome that, a raise in income tax?
I think it should be considered and discussed as you know, would that be something that might be needed? The defence of the country surely got to come first.
OK, well, look, let me come back to you. So we've got this press conference that's going on as we're speaking between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump certainly so far has not committed to any kind of backstop, which we know is what Keir Starmer very much wants to hear in terms of security for Ukraine and the US providing that backstop. That has not happened. Meetings are going to go on tomorrow. Is this 2.5%, if we don't get a backstop from the US, going to be enough? And to the point about army recruitment, how is 2.5% going to help keep to encourage people to apply for the armed forces?
I mean, these are good questions and serious questions as well. And so about 100,000 people a year apply to join our armed forces. So we're not short of people who are keen to serve in uniform. What we have inherited is a system where we spectacularly fail to get them to their training gates. So we lose 84% of applicants, not because they can't pass medical requirements or because they have a secret Russian passport, things that you and I may think of good reasons, because it takes too long. On average, it takes 249 days between applying and turning up at your training establishment. Now, that's not good enough because there are huge appetites to join, so we need to reduce that, and that's why we have introduced a new policy with from your point of application, within 10 days, we'll give you a provisional offer to join, and within 30 days, we'll give you a provisional start date so you can plan your life. But what we have to do is not only fix recruitment, and we've made changes by having a new direct entry into cyber, so people can join the cyber forces without necessarily having to do all the training that would be involved in coming through an army route, for instance. But we need to make sure we're retaining more people in our armed forces as well. That's why we've given our military the biggest pay rise in 20 years. That's why we're creating an independent commissioner to help our forces and their families be able to improve general service welfare. That's why we're making steps that will improve service life, because if we are to have a more effective military, we need to recruit more and we need to retain more. If we do both of those together, we'll have a more powerful military deterrent, and that means we'll have a better warfighting capability if we need to.
And to the second part of my question, given that you are the Armed Forces Minister and this press conference has happened between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer, Donald Trump so far has not committed either to President Macron or to Prime Minister Starmer this backstop where American forces will be there if Putin should decide to invade Ukraine once more. What's your response to that?
Well, President Trump wants a durable peace. The only way to achieve a durable peace, to have the deterrence that will stop Putin from pausing, reconstituting his forces and coming again, which is the risk, is to have a US involvement, a US backstop.
And at the moment, he's just not committing to that. He said to President Macron, he said, well, that's going to be for the Europeans. But he's not militarily, anyway, he is not committing to that yet.
Well, there's certainly a negotiation that is taking place at the moment. And one thing that the Prime Minister has said to the President is there should be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. They should be part of the negotiations. It is their people who are dying on the front line, protecting not only Ukrainian freedom, but also our freedoms as well, because our security is intricately linked to what's happening in Ukraine.
And how confident can you be in any peace deal if America doesn't commit to a backstop, as at the moment they are not?
Well, the Prime Minister's been absolutely clear on this. The only way to have a durable and lasting peace is with a US backstop. So if we are to help the President achieve what he has said he wants, a lasting peace in Ukraine, the US has to provide a backstop. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean US boots on the ground, but it does mean a US deterrence. It means options to support the European forces that may be in Ukraine in the future, depending on what security guarantees are coming out.
That's all very, but at the moment, he's just not saying he's going to do that.
Well, I think there is a negotiation going on, and certainly President Trump likes a deal. And certainly what I think is useful to understand is many of the aspects of that deal will not be on the table or in the public domain at the moment. That's why it's so important that the Prime Minister is there negotiating and making the case that when it comes to European security, Europe needs to be involved, and so does Ukraine.
We'll see if you're right, because there's going to be more meetings tomorrow with the teams of Donald Trump, Keir Starmer, and I'm quite possibly more meetings in the future. We'll move on, but before we do, I just want to tell you where we'll be next week, which is Skipton in North Yorkshire, and the following week we are in Wolverhampton. So if you live in or nearby either of those places and you want to come be part of the audience, as the people of Derby are tonight, go to the Question Time website and follow the instructions there. Right, let's take another question now from Ian Wood.
With energy companies pulling back on renewable energy plans, should the UK look at pushing back some of its own green energy targets?
John, I know you've got strong feelings about this, but I also want to ask you as a business person, because this is BP who's decided that they're going to invest less in renewables and more in drilling for oil and gas.
Yeah, absolutely not. I think, first of all, from a business proposition, it's absolutely catastrophic for them in the long term. It's catastrophic for the environment, and it's catastrophic for Britain. I've been pushing with Boris Johnson, first of all, and then Rishi Sunak, and more recently Keir Starmer, to turn Britain into the Silicon Valley of environment and technology. And by doing that, and by attracting all the brains from around the world that we can possibly attract into the UK, we would drive huge future GDP growth and much higher paid jobs and wealth for everybody. And that would put the great back in Great Britain, at the same time as helping to save the planet. And what people don't realise is just how fast this steam train is coming down the tracks. And all these catastrophes, minor catastrophes that we see around the world, and I only say minor because compared to what's coming, they're minor. They're major for those people that are being hit by them, but that is nothing compared to what's going to happen. And if we're at the forefront of environmental and technology, we'll have export products for the whole world and help to save the planet.
But John, where's the issue?
Well, hang
on, you've got BP saying, presumably getting pressure from their shareholders, because you've got other, and they're in fact not the only company that's pulling back on renewables, but they're looking at other companies that have decided to do more drilling, and they are making more money for their shareholders. So is the issue here corporate greed, as some might see it, or is the issue that there is not enough that is attractive investment-wise about renewables to entice them to do it?
It's a mix. It's corporate greed and satisfying shareholder value in the very short term and sacrificing the future. And you sacrifice the future, a lot of these chief executives will go for the profit today and tomorrow and not worry about 5 years' time because they're going to get their big golden handshake and leave with several £1 million to go and do another job. So they need to be motivated in the very, very long term. And the long term has to be in renewable energy, and it has to be investing in that. Now, if somebody's going to drill and produce more oil, as long as they turn that profitability into investment in renewable energy of the future, I've got no objection to that. But we need to do things much faster than we're doing at the moment.
Freddie.
Well, I think energy is extremely important. That's a very obvious thing to say, but it's true. And I hear politicians talking a lot about economic growth. It's become this kind of unicorn of British politics. We can't seem to achieve it. And one of the main reasons why we can't seem to achieve it is because our energy costs are extremely high. They're among the highest in the developed world. This is a serious problem for Britain. And the renewable energy revolution, the drive to net zero, well, very laudable, all of John's aims, it's not happening fast enough. And our energy bills are going up. Ed Miliband promised that they would go down by £300. They're going up by about £300, and they're probably going to keep going up because we cannot bring down energy prices. And net zero, while laudable, I think is pushing us towards net zero manufacturing, net zero growth. The only thing that isn't net zero is energy bills, which are going up a lot.
So you're saying part of the problem is we're not moving fast enough. So do you think actually, I mean, half of the question is should we pull back on our renewable, on the push for net zero? Do you think we should be going faster, or do you think actually we should be doing less in terms of net zero?
I think we might actually, for once, take a leaf out of what the Trump administration's doing, which is an all-of-the-above approach. So they will drill more. We have lots of reserves of gas. We have the North Sea, which we're shutting down, which is economically quite suicidal, I think. All of the above. If renewable energy works, let's do it. Let's invest in it by all means. But we have to do something about the fact that our energy is extremely expensive.
I can see, Maya, you're shaking your head there.
Yeah, I think this question, the two parts of this question are really important. The first is that what BP have announced this week is a really good example of why you do not leave an energy transition that is essential in the context of a climate crisis to the exact fossil fuel companies that got us into this mess and that care about shareholder profits above all else. What we do need is government strategy of investment in renewables that prioritises the planet, because when we're talking about economic devastation, wait until there are more floods, there are more major issues with the climate and the economic devastation that is going to wreak. And also thinking about people's bills. And if you think about it, so one of the things that has been talked about by the Climate Change Committee this week is the heat pumps. And when you look at heat pumps, they're too expensive for the pace of change that is needed. And I wonder who of us doesn't want stable prices, warm, insulated homes, but the issue is people lack the capital. We need the people who can borrow money cheaply, which is government, to be investing far more in heat pumps. The CCC, which is the Climate Change Committee, in the past year, they've said that 60,000 heat pumps have been fitted. By 2035, to meet our climate change commitments, that has to be 1.5 million. And yet the government, which said that they were going to pledge more money to heat pumps, have not allocated that.
So where do you want the... So you're talking about the government can borrow more because the government borrow more cheaply.
Absolutely.
Certainly, perhaps more cheaply than the rest of us. So what, you want them to increase the deficit, or do you want them to cut the budget for other things?
I think they can either borrow more or they can tax the wealthiest in this country. There's plenty of money to go around in Britain. And when we're talking about the hard choices is that we're facing a planet on fire. This government said that they were going to abide by climate commitments. Rachel Reeves said she was going to be the Green Chancellor, and that all went out the window as soon as they came into power. They said they were going to hit the ground running, and what have they done on climate? So little. It is a complete abdication of responsibility. And they talk about future generations, but they're really not caring about what is going to happen to our young people.
You're not caring about young people, Luke?
No, I don't think that's
abdicated all responsibility.
I don't think that's right. I think we need to accelerate the growth towards renewable energy. If you look at the 2024, according to the CBI, the growth in the net zero sector was 10%. That's the kind of growth rate that we need across our entire economy, but we're seeing it in the renewable energy sector.
So how do you encourage companies to do it then? You've got BP, who are reining back on renewables, as we said. You've got another company, Equinor, has done the same. Shell, they've also reined back on it. There's clearly, whatever's happening, and maybe this is something that the government cannot do anything about, but they certainly don't seem to be encouraged to move in that direction.
Well, we're making steps already. We've removed the Conservative ban on onshore wind. We've seen £34 billion worth of investment since we came to office in July last year in renewable energy. We've signed off more renewable energy schemes, and we need to deliver that at pace and go faster, because ultimately, if we want to escape the high prices of gas that is set by the global markets and the instability that comes with those high prices, we know the huge cost of Putin's invasion in Ukraine on our energy bills and the huge increase from that. We've got to wean ourselves off the reliance of gas, and to do that, we've got to massively expand our renewable energy, and that's why it's one of our 5 missions as government.
How do you get these companies to do it then?
Well, we're seeing investment coming in, so we need investments from big companies, certainly.
I mean, they're cutting back investment, so how are you going to get them to increase their investment in renewables?
Well, I think we've got to make it more attractive. That's what we are doing by removing some of the regulation that blocks onshore wind.
And the thing that I do want to know is why even the small commitments that you have made, for instance, in relation to heat pumps, you said you double what the previous government were going to be putting into that scheme, and we are nearly a year in, and there isn't even any talk of spending allocations. There's no spending review in terms of where that money is going to come from, when it's going to come. And so when you talk about being a government that is bold and that is going to hit the ground running, where's the action? Where's the action from government? Not just talking about private companies that don't have the interests of people in Britain. Really, that is not what they're most concerned about.
Well, in the first few days,
we
hit the ground running. We lifted the ban on onshore wind.
But
that generated more investment in onshore wind, precisely what we need.
But the money the government said it was going to commit, where is it on heat pumps? The extra money, where is it?
Well, we'll be seeing more funding set out when the spending review reports later this year, and that's where the investment will need to come from.
Let me, because Alicia hasn't spoken yet, and I just want to bring the audience, and I'll come to you. Yes, the man here in the blue sweater.
Hi, an alternative to renewables is nuclear that still allows energy independence and net zero targets, yet the competition for small modular reactors seems to be taking an age. Why is that?
All right, we'll come to a man at the back.
I think that was a very important point.
OK, now I'm going to come to... I'm just going to hear a few more.
I think we've got to be mindful of the secondary impacts of renewables. I mean, the government we're talking about, you know, you've released, you've enabled onshore building of wind turbines. I'm somebody who used to work in the renewable sector, so I applaud, you know, the increased use of them. Why are we not legislating to do smarter schemes? Why are we putting solar panels on pristine farmland?
Agricultural land.
Think how many warehouses, how many factories we drive down next to the motorways. Why have we not legislated to put them on the roofs of every building that we're building from here on in? I think we've got to be mindful of the secondary impacts. We're about to drive a huge investment in the national grid right the way through the heartland of this region, of this county. We've got to be mindful it's not a quick fix. There isn't one solution that's going to fix everything.
Alicia.
So I think what that goes to is the point around consent. So David Cameron was really clear that throughout his entire time in power that if we lost the consent of the people when it came to net zero and what we had to do in terms of green revolution, we would lose where we need to get to. And that's why Rishi said, look, we're going to soften some of this to make it easier for families, because the honesty around the trade-offs has been missing from a lot of politics. The reality is there's no capacity in the grid. So we can all sit here announcing as a government millions of programmes saying we're going to build this plant here and this plant here and this plant here. There is no capacity within the grid.
I mean, obviously, the Conservatives could have put some more capacity in the grid.
So we worked really hard on it. It's going to take a lot of time. It's not straightforward. So, for example, one of my constituents is redesigning the entirety of how we're going to get all the energy, for example, from sea onto land. But it's a 15-year project. It takes an incredible amount of time.
And do you think Kemi Badenoch was right, your leader, when she said we pledged net zero by 2050, but we had no plan?
No, because I think there was a plan. If you look at the ways in which
But
we've
she's wrong
tried to
about
do
that.
things, I think, look, she and I have obviously different experiences of looking at this. I've spent a lot of time looking at my local constituency because we are one of those ones who's having 2,100 acres of high-quality agricultural land absolutely covered over in the supposed show-off of the first week of the Labour government, where they signed off thousands of pages worth of stuff without even having considered it. We need to be quite serious about this. Solar, the World Bank has just said that we are the second worst suited country in the world for solar. So why are we investing in solar and wind? Crack on. I actually think wind turbines are quite beautiful. I know probably no one else on earth agrees with me, but we need to be focusing on what works. But we cannot have a religious fervour when it comes to this. We have to be honest about this. I also have concerns about the fact that we seem to be quite happy to ignore the slave labour within so many of the solar supply chains, and we're just cracking on building it. That's really not okay. But one of the things I managed to secure from my government, because I was really tough on them about this, was a commitment to protect more agricultural land and to build on roofs and car parks and all these sorts of things. And that was scrapped as soon as the new government came in. And that was really frustrating to me because I'm seeing the impact. But the point overall is that green-collar jobs are an amazing opportunity. There is so much opportunity to come from education. That's why we did so much work to make sure our kids were getting trained to the right things. But it all comes down to security. And that's where the question about nuclear and nuclear reactors is, modular reactors is so important.
Well, let's put that to
That's
Luke
how we
then.
get energy security.
So small modular reactors, I mean, there's a number of politicians talking about this, so they are effectively smaller nuclear power stations, supposedly quicker and cheaper to build. But at the moment, I think there are only 2 anywhere in the world that are actually working, and I'm not sure that's even on a commercial basis. So I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong about that, Luke. So there's a kind of competition to try and work out how do we do that in this country. So the question is, A, why is it taking so long? And then the point you were making, Alicia picked up about solar panels. Why have them on farmland? Why not have them on warehouse roofs and that kind of thing? Why not legislate for that?
Well, if you want to achieve a clean energy country, we have to have more renewables, but we also have to have more nuclear. It's the reason why the government only a few weeks ago announced a £9 billion investment in nuclear in Derby to provide the next generation of nuclear reactors for our submarines. These Royal Navy submarines will be using Derby-built reactors.
But that's
that will be the basis.
That's not energy.
That's
not energy security. That's defence security.
It absolutely is the jobs that build nuclear, and it's the supply chain. It creates 1,000 jobs in Derby, 4,000 additional roles.
Yeah, but the question is about small modular reactors that can supply energy for our domestic use.
And that's why the investment in the nuclear sector. So it's not the nuclear sector is not built as to, hey, there's a small modular reactor business over here and there's nuclear over here. It's one ecosystem. The investment in the nuclear ecosystem is absolutely essential to build the research and development, in particular to build the skills. Because we haven't invested enough in nuclear skills for far too long. That means that people with nuclear skills can earn a very pretty penny because there's not enough for them to go round. By building more nuclear skills, more FE colleges, creating the skills for nuclear, more university graduates realising that using their expertise in nuclear will not only address the climate challenge, create the energy security that we are missing as a nation. That helps us wean ourselves off expensive gas and wean ourselves off the dictators where the gas comes from.
And what about the solar panels? I mean, this is the blighting agricultural farmland. That's the point you were making as well. Why not legislate to put them, before using one agricultural farmland, on the roofs of buildings?
Well, Ed Miliband is absolutely keen on solar panels, and it's one of the areas that we want to do more on. I think the concern that Alicia raises around the supply chains is a valid one, though. We need to make sure that all our supply chains are as ethical as they possibly can be, and that means onshoring as much of our jobs as we can.
You're not answering that man's question, which is why stick them on farmland instead of sticking them on the roofs of warehouses and buildings like that?
Well, I think the answer is there will be both. We absolutely need to put more industrial land. At the moment, if I use my own department as an example, the Ministry of Defence spends about £1 billion a year on electricity, but we generate hardly anything. And so we need to generate more electricity. That creates more energy security, that creates more jobs, that helps put more money on the front line. And so it is about and, not or in this respect, because if we are to move to that clean energy by 2030, that mission, one of Labour government's 5 core missions, we're going to need to make sure that we're investing in nuclear, in wind, onshore and offshore, and more solar as well.
But forgive me, the policy isn't working because, for example, the solar plant in my constituency, so 50% of all solar applications in the country are Lincolnshire and Rutland, so just not far from here at all. Ed Miliband signed it off, gave it off to this awful company who are completely complicit in the Uyghur genocide. A few months later, they've sold it to an American company. They bought the last one that was signed off, and all the energy they're going to create is going to go to help Tesco say that they've done their CSR and say that they're being net zero. So none of the money is going to, none of the energy is going into the grid. And this is one of the big problems we're having with these giant solar plants. So the government needs to really get a tight grip on it and say, look, if we're signing this off, it goes into the grid to benefit all, not just individual companies, which is what's happening.
All right, I'm going to take another question now. Climate is something I don't doubt we will come back to on this programme. Connor Gresham.
Do you think Britain's becoming lazy with the amount of people not working?
Do you think Britain's becoming lazy with the amount of people not working? Connor, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
All right. And why?
Well, I think since COVID, and obviously a lot of people was working from home and staying at home, they've realised that they like the lifestyle, and the amount of people that are currently on benefits, I think says a lot and has increased since then. So, yeah, definitely.
OK, so the latest statistics show that 1 in 5 people of working age, aged between 16 and 64, are economically inactive, which means they're not working and they're not looking for work. So that's 1 in 5. About a third of them said it was due to long-term illness. I'm going to come around the panel. Since you asked the question, what do you think we should do? Take people off benefits, or...?
Yeah, I think a more structured approach of looking at people that actually need benefits and actually that are people that don't need benefits. I think it's not policed well at the minute. You can apply online, no interviews, no catch-ups, no anything like that. So I think people that can come into the country, access funds, and some people don't even speak English.
Do you think it's a migrant issue?
I think it's part of the problem, definitely. Definitely.
OK. Freddy?
Well, I feel well qualified to speak about this because I am instinctively very lazy. But I think there is absolutely no doubt that you're right. We have a huge problem. We have 6 million people on benefits. We have 50,000 new claimants on sickness every month. Our economy is not growing. We have serious economic problems. We cannot afford to keep spending this much on benefits. We're going to ruin ourselves. And I think it's probably the biggest issue facing this country today. Yeah. And I don't think our government is doing enough about it or showing enough eagerness to grasp this very difficult nettle.
And so if you've got a third of people saying they're not working because of long-term illness, and amongst young people, mental health is cited as a key issue as well, what do you think the answers are?
Well, mental health is a big issue, I think. But we just have to accept the fact that we cannot subsidise such a large percentage of our population forever. It just doesn't make financial sense. And it does mean being cruel and being tough, I'm afraid. OK. John, as an employer?
Yeah.
So
the
question is, is Britain becoming lazy with the amount of people not working?
Yeah, I think without doubt there is an element of that. We've witnessed a great big increase in people talking about work-life balance. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you build work-life balance into the COVID situation of people working away from the office, working at home, and just this general malaise that we have, which seems to affect the younger people, when you look at the surveys of the younger people, it horrified me that the vast majority are not patriotic, and I wonder where that comes from. So I think a lot does need to be done. I think it's a big challenge of our time. But there are other challenges as well, because we're rapidly becoming a geriatric population. And I don't know why governments 50 years ago didn't say the retirement age will... This won't be popular with some of the older people in the audience, including me, but I don't know why the government didn't say that half your expected lifespan extra will be then you go to work for that period. When I was born, my life expectancy was 67, retirement age was 65. Now somebody born today, their life expectancy is 81. Well, we can't just keep retiring people at 66, 67, and all the young people have got to try and... That's those that go to work, by the way, have got to keep these older people in a lifestyle. So we have to do something very radically about all of this, and there's no reason why somebody in the 60s or even 70s can't work in the same way that I do, as long as you've got your health. And that's a whole different question as well.
Okay. It's the man there with the glasses and the green top, I think you've got. Yeah.
It seems strange to suggest that the problem is benefits when we know that the number of people who are the figures involved in screwing the tax system are massively greater than people who are screwing the benefit system.
So people paying more tax, how would that get more people into work, though?
Well, it's just the idea that that benefits is the biggest problem, whereas tax evasion is a far, far bigger problem in this country than benefit fraud is.
OK. Man here in the dark top, yes.
I used to work in the civil service as a work coach, and I wasn't allowed to help people do a CV. We would have to outsource that to a different company. So people that are on a very limited budget because they're on benefit will then having to catch another bus or 2 buses to get to another place. And if it's already a barrier to come to the job centre, we're putting other barriers in place for them to actually look for work. And it's not a one shoe fits all. There are general people out there looking for work. There are people cheating the system. But it's about cost, about, you know, launching an investigation and being able to take that person to court, to able to claw that money back. What's the point if it's actually costing the taxpayer more money to do so? And there are a lot of people not actually claiming benefits, are entitled to benefits. And there are a lot of people that are actually in work on universal credit. So it's not just, you know, a lot of people aren't working. That's just not representative.
OK, man here in the front, in the check shirt.
Yes, I have to say I completely disagree that Britain is becoming more lazy. I think the times have definitely changed. For example, there's more people going and getting their degrees, so the competition is a bit more fierce. And especially with the younger generation, so I'm a millennial. However, the Gen Zs now coming up, they're going to have a lot tougher time financially, even with their education, to get a professional job. And it's about being a bit more creative with what you're doing, so you may have to work full-time and have a part-time job to eventually get your deposit, for example. So I don't think people are becoming more lazy. I think that the times have changed and the younger generation are adapting to it.
Just to be clear, what I'm referring to with the 1 in 5 is not people who are looking for work. It's people who... No, it's totally fine. People who some of whom maybe will be students, but people who are economically inactive, they're choosing not to work, either because they cannot work or they don't want to work. Maya?
Yeah, I think the point that the gentleman made about benefits and tax evasion is a really important one, because this debate feels a bit like a tune I've heard before, say from David Cameron throughout the 2010s. We have an incredibly punitive benefit system. People who are on benefits are not treated well, are not living a kind of life of luxury. And when you actually look at the statistics and you look at what's going on with people, if you think about our young people, those people who are not in work and who are not looking for work, I do look at that, and as you know, I work in a university, so working with young people, and I do think, what future have they got in a country where the Chancellor is all doom and gloom, where youth services have been cut to the bone? So we've had since 2010, about nearly a 70% cut to youth services that are essential to building up the confidence of young people, supporting people who maybe don't have that support elsewhere in their life. And then you can't get a decent job, you can't afford a house, you can't afford university fees, you don't want to be riddled with debt. We have to do better by our young people, and continually saying to them, you're lazy and you're not working hard enough, totally misses what is actually going on. And if we want to solve it, I think we need a more compassionate approach, not a more punitive approach.
Oh, we're sorry, Freddy.
I quite agree with the points about tax evasion, but the biggest tax evasion of all is rich people leaving the country, which they're doing at record numbers at the moment, because they feel very heavily taxed and they feel Britain isn't an accommodating place for them. John, thank you very much for sticking around. But a lot of rich people are leaving. And it's sort of satisfying to watch rich people leave and think, you know, well, who cares about them? But unfortunately, they contribute a hell of a lot to the exchequer, and we're losing that. So that is a kind of legitimate evasion. A legal evasion is just people leaving the country who have money and pay a lot of tax, and it's another big problem.
So, Alicia, let me come to you. So Connor's question is, do you think Britain is becoming lazy with the amount of people not working?
I think the thing that breaks my heart is that I go into a lot of schools, as Luke will as well, and I think when MPs came to my school when I was younger, it was just my local comp, we all said, you know, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a teacher, I want to be whatever else it is. Then it transitioned, I'm a millennial as well, it transitioned to being footballers and kind of celebrity sports. And now when I go into schools, people talk about wanting to be influencers, wanting to be gamers. that is a very different mindset from the mindset of, you know, my father who left school at 11, went straight into building double-decker buses. You know, you worked for your hard day, and I think I really worry about productivity, because that's what essentially the problem is for our economy, is what is the impact of this on our productivity. But I think the figures show that it's predicted that if we keep going as we are, by 2030, the bill for working age benefits will be 75 billion a year. Are we really saying that that is sustainable? Of course it's not. So we do have to tackle this, whether we like it or not, and it is going to be difficult. But we've had even doctors ringing the alarm bells. You know, I remember last year them saying, please, if you're a student coming home from university this Easter, please don't ring us saying that university is really tough and you're really depressed and you need to be signed off and you need support, because that's what it is. University is incredibly tough. If I asked all of you in the audience to put your hand up if you've had a mental health, please don't, but you've had a mental health condition over the last few years, but did you keep going to work as best of your ability? Did you do everything you could to stay in employment? Yes, because you felt a sense of responsibility to your fellow employees and to what you were doing. Now, of course, all of us will have extraordinary things that happen where we do need that support, and you have to be helped, and that's what MPs do. You know, people come to my office and say, I'm in desperate times, everything has gone wrong, please help me.
But what you're saying is you think there is an over-medicalising.
There's an over-medicalising.
As the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, said when he was in a previous job, an over-medicalising of what are effectively everyday setbacks and travails.
Yeah, and how difficult life is. Life is difficult. But I think that point around productivity, we have to tackle it as a country, or we're not going to get the growth that, as you say, politicians constantly talk about.
I mean, the thing about that is, yes, life is difficult, but younger people do have a worse lot than the generations that have come before them. And I talk to my students, and they're all working incredibly hard at university, but they're also having to work incredibly hard in jobs outside of university, but much longer hours than I ever had to when I was at university, caring for parents or family members. And so I think to kind of have this blanket idea that young people who are struggling because they're living in a country and in a world that is more difficult now than it used to be.
I think it's really difficult to blanket say it was so much easier. You know, my mum killed herself to go to university, working every single hour she could outside of it. It is not new for people to have to do multiple jobs whilst trying to go through studying, while trying to make their way in the world.
The numbers of people that are having to do that is much greater. The cost of housing is much greater. The pay is much worse. The job opportunities are much worse, and we are living in a planet that is...
There's incredible job opportunities out there.
That is on fire. And so to think that young people are just being lazy or kind of playing up their mental health illnesses, I really think doesn't actually do... It doesn't do a
young
disservice.
people have never had so many opportunities.
I think
the opportunities I have compared to my parents are extraordinary. It's
I'm
the same
talking
for all
about
of
the
us
next
here.
generation.
All right, well, tell you what,
it does them a disservice.
I will come to you. Let's see what our audience thinks. I've got some microphones over here to people. Yes, woman here in the front in the stripy jumper.
Hi. So I think there's a couple of things to think about. Firstly, we used to start going to work at 16 and work to 60, and now you start work, probably most people as apprentices or post-university start in their early 20s. And then I know a lot of my older colleagues after the pandemic left, so they left in their mid-50s, which means you're having a significantly smaller number of people going to work. Secondly, I'm really keen on a circle of strength and resilience. You get your colleagues, you look after them. Tomorrow, I will be going and picking up my colleague who does not want to come into work because she's scared, because she has to get onto a bus and there's lots of germs. So I'm going to drive, I'm going to pick her up and she's going to come into work. And that's what we can do because we are good people. I'm sure all of us here are good people, and we can work together to get those who don't, or scared, or terrified sometimes to go to work. Let's do it together. We can make people who go to work have more jobs for other people, because you get on the bus or you get on the train, and that creates more jobs. It's beneficial.
Woman at the back in the white top with the glasses.
Hello, I'm working in a sector which is dependent on a lot of volunteer support, and what we find is that the numbers who are volunteering are going down, and some of that is about, I would say, young people not being encouraged, being discouraged by the system of believing that because they're receiving a benefit that they're not allowed to volunteer, and people who are having to work longer hours and longer years not being available in the way that they were in the past. So we'd really like people to have a better work balance, but also to be encouraged and see the opportunities that there are to try many different things through volunteering.
Okay, woman here right in the front.
I think we're setting people up to fail right at school age, actually. So thinking about mental health moving forward into working life, send waiting lists at the moment are horrendous.
That's for special educational needs,
yeah, that's putting a massive strain on mainstream schools. If you go for a private appointment, there isn't the resource there to support it. You know, where do these people stand in the future if they can't get the support in those early years?
And you think that's what's contributing to the level of economic inactivity? So, Luke, you know, Labour's in government now, and you know, Alicia quoted this figure that by 2030 the health and disability benefits bill is expected to be something like 75 billion. I mean, at the moment, it's 56 billion, and that's more than planned departmental spending on justice, on transport, environmental and rural affairs combined. Do you think something needs to be done, or do you think we need to be more sympathetic, as Maya is saying?
Well, I think we can do more and be more sympathetic at the same time, actually, because I don't quite agree with Connor that Britain is lazy, but I do agree with you that we need more people in work. And there's two aspects that we haven't spoken about tonight. One of those is how many people want to be in work but can't because they're on an NHS waiting list. That's why we've got to bring down the NHS waiting list from the record highs that we inherited from the Conservatives. The more people who are sitting in pain at home, not able to contribute, that slows growth, but more importantly, it ruins the lives of those individuals who aren't able to afford to go out to work, to live their lives fully. So bringing down waiting lists and investing more in mental health at the same time can have a substantial effect on improving the numbers of people at work. And the second one is around those people who are claiming disability support, because I found it really frustrating that there was a big stick used to hit disabled people under the last government, assuming that they were just lazy. Well, I have not met a disabled person who does not want to work. What we have to find a way is supporting them to work. That's why Liz Kendall and the Department for Work and Pensions team are trying to find a way of adapting the systems that I think all too often accused people of inactivity rather than help them to do a job, to find a way of entering the workplace again. Now, those two measures together, addressing NHS waiting lists and helping people back into work rather than hitting them with a big regulatory stick, I think is the way that we can help get the growth back into our economy and improve the lives of those people who aren't currently in the workplace. That's good for business, it's good for the individuals involved, it's also good for the taxpayer at the same time, because that money that is being spent on those benefits could be spent on other government priorities. So there's a real benefit for us taking those steps to do that, but that will take some time, and it will also need to address some of the culture and the barriers that stop disabled people from being able to...
Look, while I can't disagree with that at all, it's the wrong end of the drag curve, and governments get this wrong end of the drag curve all the time. The fundamental problem with health is not just that the NHS is underperforming, it's that the government, no government, the Tories or you yourselves, do anything about the biggest malaise that we've got in society, which is sugar. And it's forecast that in the next 15 years, the entire budget of the National Health Service will be spent on diabetes. The entire budget in 15 years. What the government need to do is really tackle this issue of disastrous foods in our supermarket and fast foods and really get to grips with the health of the nation. And part of that would be taxation, taxing high sugar, high fructose, highly damaging foods that we all love, and it wouldn't be very popular, but sometimes a government has to do the things that are not popular, and we're not doing it. And we're in the same way they're not doing enough on climate change, we're not doing enough on personal health. And in 15 years, the US is ahead of us on this, but we will be desperate for diabetes and the health service.
Right, I'm going to have to end it there. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but thank you very much to our panel. Thank you very much to our audience here in Derby for all your questions and your points. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time in Derby. Bye-bye.